Hello and welcome to What It Takes to Lead, a podcast about Mike Sterlacey's faith, family, friendships, and business lessons learned over 40 plus years of selling insurance and building a rapid growth, multi-million-dollar insurance agency in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. I'm one of your hosts, Garrett Cooper, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Leif Hurst, producer Charlie Hooper, special guest Paul Keisling, and Coverica founder and chairman Mike Sterlacey. Gentlemen, how's everyone doing on this fine day?
Good.
Great. I love Fridays.
That's good. Yeah. First Friday of 2024.
Yeah.
So, didn't do the whole resolution thing. Did y'all do anything?
No.
I didn't stick to the last one. So,
I did do one. My resolution is to not make resolutions. So
there you go. Perfect.
Nice.
What about you guys?
I did make a resolution, and I've already forgotten it. So maybe that speaks to the wine and the champagne flowing at a friend's house. So it's already been forgotten.
Yeah, well, I was promptly in bed at 10:30 on New Year's Eve, but really had a great time of kind of sitting and reflecting on 2023. It was a hard year for me and our household, but that gave me good pause to reflect and also then say, well, I'm still here and God still has some things for me in the new year. So what does that look like? So it actually went from a hard day to a more optimistic day. So thanks for asking.
Oh, that's
good.
Great. That's great.
That's great.
I like that, kind of looking back rather than looking forward.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a nice segue. Paul, you're our first video special guest. And Paul Keisling is a senior consultant at the Center Consulting Group. And Paul, as you and I have talked in the past, you didn't always used to do consulting. So can you share with our audience your unique professional background, just how you found your way in the consulting field?
Sure.
And what you think of it so far?
It's always easier to look back and look at the story that's been woven through your life. And again, I had opportunity to do that on Monday, but I've just really been enjoying looking at that. As I'm probably the oldest guy in the room, so there's a lot to look back at, and mostly to be grateful for it because the premise I live with is God's weaving a story, and I don't always get to peek around the corner and see where that's going, but I can look back and say, wow, that's how that all fits together. And I'll just say at the outset, in my consulting work, I can look back over a 45-year career time and time again and say, oh, so that's what that was about. That was preparing me for this. So, no, I didn't go to a graduate school on how to be a consultant. I would say God used a 45-year university of life and just some incredible experiences and mentors and successes and failures and falling down to say, I'm preparing you for this time. So that's the premise I bring going into this. And I'll start way back with wandering into college and wandering through 4 years of a major that I only chose because my best friend was doing it. So to say I was intentional would be a stretch. But it was a behavioral science major. And in the fall of my senior year, I was called into my advisor's office and she said, so you have to do a practicum for the next 2 semesters. And I said, well, that sounds great. What's a practicum? And she says, you'll go out to a program twice a week and you'll serve there and that will help shape your skill set. And since you've not planned it and all the good ones are taken, you will get what's left, which is Harrisburg State Hospital, which was a rather wretched psychiatric facility outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And after a 5-minute orientation at the hospital, I was sent upstairs to the locked unit of the psychiatric hospital to begin my internship. I was convinced I would never get out of there alive. I was assigned to a gentleman named Mr. Weaver, who gave me another 5-minute orientation and then turned me loose on the unit and said, go talk to people. And I said, for what purpose? He said, to care about them because very few people do. And your job is to learn about them and care about them. Wow. That was transformative because it caught fire in me. It became a lifelong passion to work with folks with serious mental illness and to work with folks that many other programs would fail or choose to eliminate or discard or screen out. And that really set me on a course that involved graduate school, a social work administration, a stint in seminary to look at theology and counseling, and to, again, run into some wonderful mentors. And one of those mentors would become the senior partner in our company. And in 1982, at the ripe old age of 27, I was really blessed to co-found an organization that was a labor of love. Um, and we were a caring organization far before we were a company. And we really had to grow into being a company through a lot of mistakes and getting some help and guidance along the way. But I would say the roots of understanding how to grow a company, how to steward a company well, and then ultimately how to shepherd that company to live beyond me took root early on through some of the counsel and advice we received along the way. And let me again, looking back, I would say it was a very Paul-centric organization. And people would say, "Oh, Paul, you're the heart and soul of who we are and the values you bring." Um, and that's very gratifying to a point until you realize how limiting that is.
Hmm.
If you know the story of Moses in the Bible, Moses was a very dynamic God's man to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So here he was leading 1 million people, but it was a very Moses-centric operation because everyone went to Moses with everything they had. And I became aware I was becoming a little Moses in my own right. And as we began to grow, I had this terrible discovery that I couldn't be everywhere all the time. And so we really had to.
Who was your Jethro?
Who was my? Well, there were many Jethros. We had a consultation come in once, and there was a very sweet man, and he interviewed us all, and he said, "Paul, what do you see as the path forward?" And I said, "I'll die in my chair with my pencil in my hand." And he said, "Great, then you'll make every mistake possible in your organization because you actually do think it's about you, don't you?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, I wanted to be humble and say no, but I quietly suspected yes." And I didn't listen. God's patient with us, so he kept throwing bumps along the way. And we got big enough to the point where I couldn't be everywhere at once. And that's when the whole notion of scaling and scalability really hit. And I get to do a lot of that in my consultation work now. And that is, there's something that's so impactful. Think about the 4 precepts that Mike talks about and how you embed those into a company. Well, how do you scale that to different locations? As our company grew
Hmm.
from 1 program to 2 to 8 programs just in the southeastern Pennsylvania area, let alone growing into western Pennsylvania, then into Tennessee, and now the company beyond me is now in North Carolina and Alabama. How do you bake in what really matters to you and know that you're doing that in a sustainable way and in a way that really reflects the values of what you're trying to do? And that really woke me and I'd say our organization up to how do we provide clarity of scope and provide supervision that is not just incidental or relational, but really planned well and has some transparency and metrics to it. Now, trying to get psychiatric providers to be transparent and measure anything is nearly impossible. So that became my life's work, trying to introduce that transparency and sustainability across the organization. But it was really important to me, and I can think back to pivotal moments along the way. So one morning we were having a senior staff meeting, about 20 of us, and when I visit the North Star room at Coverica, I think back to those senior staff meetings we were having, and we had a hot issue, and I was up front going on as I could sometimes do with great passion. And I looked, and there's this sweet young lady in the front row, Serena, and I see that she's weeping. And you're talking, and at the same time, you say, "What have I said that has so hurt this woman, and why is she so upset?" So we get through the meeting. I go to her and I say, "Serena, I'm so sorry. What did I say? Is there something I offended you?" She said, "No, no, no, that's not it at all. Who's going to be able to do this for you or for us when you, Paul, are gone?"
Hmm.
Mm.
And while that might sound like a great compliment, I was devastated by it because I said, again, Paul centric. I'm the show. How do we grow leaders? So the whole notion of how do leaders develop and how do we grow leaders that can actually even go past us became another big part of my work. My senior partner was older, and I really watched him struggle with leaving the organization and becoming less central to it, and said to myself that would really not be the path I would like to take. So how do I steward this well? And so starting in 2018, I began that process. It took a couple of years, and so I finally left the organization in March of 2020. But that was also because of the compelling event of my wife's cancer and chemo and radiation. So it became a real press that it was time for me to move on. But at the same time, I had struck up a relationship with Jay Desko at the Center Consulting Group. Well, where did that come from? If you go back to 2013, I was chairing the elder board of a church. It was a large church with a lot going on and very successful in every obvious way, except we had a real leadership problem and a pastor that was, let's just say it was a nightmare. And this whole thing blew up, and it blew up on my watch. And after we got done with all the attorneys said, yeah, you're nowhere near where you need to be. You need a consulting organization. And we happen to know a faith-based organization that you could work with. So I met Jay back in 2013. He saw me at my worst or my best as we navigated crises and moved through reactive to more proactive work and rebuilding the organization, the church, and getting healthy. So Jay and I flirted then from 2013 to 2019, and that's when I started doing some part-time consulting and began not full-time, but more dedicated consulting in 2020 with a view towards how do I work with organizations who are either facing crises, leadership crises, or how do I work with organizations who are interested in scaling? And then having gone through, I'll say, an interesting and sometimes difficult succession plan, how do we begin doing that with our other organizations? So the sweet spot for my work is leadership development, team development, succession planning, and I still love a good crisis whenever possible. So that's the short version of how I found my way into consulting after, I'll say, a 45-year education.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Well, I think as I'm sure our audience is already picking up, we're really fortunate to have you on the show today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between Paul, your story, and Mike, where you're at now. Making your succession plan, finding leaders, and making sure your core ideas follow through after you're gone.
Oh, yeah.
Except I will say Mike's paying far more attention to it earlier on.
Well, no, that's the thing is a lot of people don't think about it until it's too late. You had brought up your church. The church I grew up in was a Church of Christ church, and our pastor, really was just kind of the rock that held it all together. And Keith Robinson ended up getting cancer and passed away pretty quickly within a couple of months. And this was a congregation that was 600, 700, 800 parishioners on an average Sunday, and the entire church folded within probably 5 months of his passing. I still have very, very fond memories of growing up in that church. But that's always something that kind of I think about with Mike, is because it's something Mike has talked about as long as I've known him, is how do I make this thing live past me? And so, let's just kind of hop back to the beginning. When was the first time you heard the word Coverica, and what did Mike come with you specifically to solve?
Yeah, so Jay Desko, who's our director, said, "Hey, Paul, I want you to sit down a meeting with this group in Texas. They found us on the internet." I said, "Most of our work is more local, more relational, and referral personally, but we do some national work at this point." And he said they're kind of checking us out, but I really think you ought to be involved in this meeting. I said, I couldn't even say Coverica at that point, let alone spell it, but. So I literally sat in on a Zoom call, I think first with Mike's assistant. She was just sort of vetting us to make sure we were somewhat normal. And then we got on with Mike, and I don't want to steal the thunder, but pretty early on, just hearing Mike and his vision and the questions he was asking just captured me, and said, yeah, I'd love to be a part of this process with Mike.
Beautiful.
Yeah, actually, let me build on that there. So, Mike, you've obviously earlier on the show talked about the importance of reaching out to experts, right? To get informed. You've talked a number of times on the show about resources that you've read, most recently, say the Eisenhower book, and that you place a lot of importance on talking to experts. So, how do you, like in this case, how did you know it was the right time? Because, like Leif mentioned, you've been talking about succession planning, for years now. How did you know it was the right time to finally reach out to an expert and begin the succession planning process?
Well, as Leif just kind of iterated earlier, I've been working on succession planning at least 20 years. I'm always at the end. I start at the end and I work backwards. But really, to be just really open and honest, I was facing burnout. I didn't want to take the staff and smash the rock to get out the water, which Moses did. Yeah. But it's so hard when, and I don't know because essentially Paul built a business. Mm-hmm. And so we related on that basis. But the challenge becomes when you really take stock of you're not infallible, you're only here for a short time. Solomon at the very end says, I think the Greek word is havel. We're just a mist. And so that has bothered me because I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot of lives that are tied to this company and they're dependent on the future of this company. And I'm not always going to be here. And it's starting to become so difficult. At the same time, I have other business interests, as you know, Leif, you and Garrett and Tony. We're starting a technology insurance company called Ansel. So I realize between, as Dr. Laura Schlesinger would say, between now and dead, is this what you want to do? With Coverica, I've been here 32 years. One of the ISMs that we had was saying, Mike, look at the scoreboard, you've won. And I thought it was an interesting way that he framed it. But the fact is I pretty much accomplished what I set out to accomplish. And now the point is, I think God built this company using me so that it would pass on. And so there's a movie, I forgot the name of the movie, where the parent fakes their death to see how the kids are going to act about the money. So in a way, I'm trying to synthesize that where I travel, like I'm leaving Monday, I'm going to be in Florida, theoretically for a couple of months, but we'll fly back as needed. But to be out of here to see how everybody handles it. It's one thing to tell people, okay, this is your company, which I have been saying for decades. And now that we're actually transferring the stock, there are still people that are thinking, about themselves and not really about how do we run this company, And so if I'm not physically here, spiritually here because I'll be in Florida, then it's going to force people to think about that. So we had an executive assistant that I said I was looking for a faith-based consulting group because I had been part of a mastermind for many, many years. And what I loved about it is you'd get a bunch of other business leaders, owners, typically, some C-level, but mostly owners. And we would meet like every 6 weeks. It'd be an all-day thing, and it would really be a cathartic experience to where, these guys are not, they don't take any prisoners. They will just rip you apart. But the one thing lacking is it wasn't faith-based. Now, I was looking for a succession planner that wasn't just about EBITDA, making money. Okay, I could do the Mitt Romney thing, buy up companies, strip them down, make them very profitable, spin them off, and play that game, and I end up with a lot of money. But just where you're from, Garrett, there's a lot of unemployed people there because when the steel industry left.
Yep.
So that just doesn't make me feel right. So found interesting. I remember my first conversation with Jay Lynn, who was my assistant at the time, said that he was fascinated why in the world, because I asked him, what books are you reading? And that just really piqued his interest. And when I was talking to him, he says, I have a heart for people like you, Mike. So we immediately hit it off. And then later on, I met Tony and Paul. But I think the answer was knowing my mortality and knowing that it's not about me. And I love what Ronald Reagan said. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't take credit for it. So the more I got out of the way, the bigger the company has become.
Yeah. And let me jump in there, Mike, and say I actually wrote in big letters on a piece of paper in front of me that says, Mike faced mortality. In a lot of the organizations and businesses we work with, we have founders and strong leaders who have yet to come to terms with that. And I would say Mike and my best friend who passed away a year ago were two examples of, I'll say, living in the light of mortality or eternity, saying, I'm not eternal. I'm not forever. And this thing, if it really brings value, if there's value to be created and passed on, has to go beyond me. And I could see and hear in Mike that question was burning, and it was expressed in lots of ways, including what God do you have next for Coverica, for my family? And that's where Mike was also unique, because there was a real family dynamic to this. And then for Mike himself, and those three questions really do join together. And there was an essential humility to those. And some people, because Mike is so bigger than life and fills the room, would say, how do you link humility to Mike? I believe Mike fundamentally operates from a position of humility. And that's why he's such a good steward, because stewards know they're not eternal, that this thing that they've been entrusted with is something that they are to build and nurture and then hand off to someone else, like in a relay race. And I heard that in Mike, and he was deeply troubled by it and cared so deeply for Coverica, so deeply for his family, and just this incessant curiosity. God, what are you doing next? Looking around the corner, because the Mikes of the world are always looking around the corner. What's next?
And we actually bumped into somebody. Let's see if you remember this. We were looking at buildings. I'm not going to say the guy's name. You would immediately know who it was. So I wish I had I know there's a beep button on there. We've never used it before, but there was a building that we looked at whenever we were shopping for buildings. And there was a guy there that was in his 90s. It was up here on the toll road.
Yeah.
And we saw what a business looks like when they don't think about succession. And this guy he was like 92 years old and was still coming to the office. And the company was just, the only word I can think about it is died on the vine.
Yeah, it's all but dead.
Paul, you mentioned this, and leave to that example, why is this such a problem? Why are so many leaders just reluctant to get out of the way?
Yeah, I think our identity becomes so embedded in that. And particularly if you've been successful at it. Let's jump back to Moses for a minute, because if you read the Bible, God himself says there's never been a man like Moses on this earth, a mortal man. Jesus would be different. But what would that do to your head when the king of the universe says there's nobody like you? I suspect Moses thought that he might rather be essential to the operation, right? And it was his father-in-law who had to come to him and say, actually, you're the biggest problem, because you are the funnel. Everything's footing to you. Nobody's getting any smarter, because, in fact, in your presence, Moses, they get dumber. And therefore, you are the show. And I think a lot of particularly founders and dynamic business folks enjoy being the smartest person in the room. If you know the book Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, she really calls out, are you a multiplier or a diminisher? And that is, in your presence, do people lift up? Do you get more from them? Do you get their ideas, their energy? And do they get smarter? Or because you so fill the space, they sit back and at best they do is counterpunch. And I think we all have some level of narcissism, and I think it can be so captivating to be successful in a business. And it takes that essential humility and that essential understanding of mortality that, again, I've seen in Mike, that says, there's got to be a better way, because if this is all there is, and Mike said early on, guys, making money is not that hard. So if the point is EBITDA, that game over. Mike, you've hit the jackpot. Done. Well, okay, now what? Well,
now what?
Now what? Okay, that's the exciting part. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'd like to have that problem, trust me, it's not what you think.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, there is a burden that comes with this, and I've seen Mike carry it.
I think it says a lot about how much you live out that first preset of dying to self, right? Where you're not the main character.
Yeah, you've got to get the ego out of the way. And I mean, you're seeing this play out right now in geopolitics. I mean, not to bring up politics so quickly, but
here we go.
I know. Here we go. Here's Leaf. But I mean, as an example, if you look at places, Russia, China, it's like anyone that would ever be a successor has been thrown in prison or killed. And so it's like, what happens when those leaders fall, as do the country? And it's really the system. You've got to have the forethought of saying, I'm not going to be here forever. And it's not even like there's a line of succession. You got to go, far deep to think about who would replace.
Well, I think the core in that, Leaf, if I can jump in, is that dig deeper. I live in the why world. We were going over finances with Chris. He's buying the Alliance, taking over the majority ownership on that, and so it's kind of fun to watch him mature. Mm-hmm. But here's what the issue really comes down to, and that is, and Paul said it. They become embedded. What the company is, it's who they are. Most successful business people are scared to death to leave what got them to be important. Mm-hmm. And because then they're going to say, well, what does my life mean now without this?
Right.
They're that John Candy movie, the Jamaican sled team.
Oh, yeah.
Why did you do it, coach? And he says, you'll realize if you're not enough without it, you won't be with it, the gold medal.
Right.
So, God used a real goofball in me to be successful, and I don't think it's because it's me. I think that all the circumstances played well. I've got an obnoxious side to where I'll drive things, and I will make a decision, and I'm okay with collateral damage. So those are the qualities that, and we'll get to the questions further on, but those are the qualities that I'm working on developing and helping others be comfortable with.
Right.
So it really comes down to people, certainly business leaders, are so tied to what they're doing that they lose their identity on who they really are, what God meant them to be. And that's why so many of them can have successful businesses and miserable home lives.
No.
Yeah. And I think, Garrett, to answer that question just another way, that identity becomes so tied to the business, like Mike just said, what am I without that? Mm-hmm. Versus the more exciting question, it's the same question, what am I without that? And you begin to explore new areas and, again, look back and say, wow, these 45 years have been to prepare me for the next thing.
That's the right attitude.
Here's Mike building Ansel. Well, guess what? The roots of Ansel and the skills it takes and the drive it takes go back decades for Mike. And now I think it's a new calling. And, for a lot of folks, and I live in an over 55 community, and I talk to some of these guys. They got their package, they retired, and I'd say, "So what do you do?" And they look at me with a blank face, and they're waiting for the weather to warm up so they can golf. So they polish their golf clubs, and my heart breaks. I'd last a minute, and they say, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Everything."
Yeah, retirement seems like a lonely endeavor.
Yeah.
I don't think some of us are built for it.
I think if I have a dear friend, he's in his 90s, and his goal is to arrive in heaven exhausted. And I like that.
I like that too. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Paul, so in going back to your work with Coverica, looking back at what you've done with the Sterlacey family and the company as a whole, what were some of the major successes, some major wins?
Whenever Mike came to you, it wasn't just about the company either. There was a family component.
Wonderful. And listen, in family businesses in general, in fact, I'm working on a little video clip right now entitled, "Will Our Family Business Tear Our Family Apart?" Because there are complexities. Look, a family business is an incredible opportunity. And the idea of family being able to participate in this and push it forward and take those values, get into philanthropy together, there's a million upsides, but there's a lot of challenges along the way because do the kids have a sense of entitlement? How do I pass this on? Are they going to steward it the way I did? What about sibling rivalries and so forth? And it's all there. And again, Mike, because he's comfortable with just that open and honest communication, was able to say, listen, here's Coverica, here's our family, and we'd like you guys to dive in. And again, Mike and Heidi, it's easy to love them and all the Sterlacy. So we were invited in a substantial way. So, I mean, for our process was to go and listen. We spent a couple of days with pretty much everybody at Coverica, interviewed a lot of folks across the organization. And we're able to then sit with Mike and Heidi and say, here are some things we see relative to the company and leadership that it's still pretty Mike centric. Folks admire Mike, but they don't know quite what do I have the ability or capacity to step up and lead in the presence of a Mike. And that's more their own stuff than about Mike, but we all do it. Family, and there were some real family issues. So Tony, who was my co-conspirator in this consultation, said, let's invite the Sterlacy family to Pennsylvania for a 2-day family retreat, which was a remarkable experience of we spent some time praying together, worshiping together, and then deep, rich, hard conversation. And so I'd say some wonderful reconciliation and a path forward, some hard clarity where the folks had to say things to each other that were both difficult but liberating in their own way. And I think that allowed a number of the family members to start looking for their seat in the process. And one of the great byproducts of that is to see Chris assuming leadership of the alliance, and to really have a relationship with Mike that is more parallel mentor, to be sure. But Chris, these are decisions you've got to make. And I've seen Mike kick the ball back to Chris a number of times, saying, well, welcome to the hot seat. You got to live with this decision. And it's wonderful. And just to see each family member, finding that, including some family members who are not going to be part of that future. One of the things we teach at the center is, in a family business, you may be an employee, or you may not be. It may not be your seat. You may be an owner, but frankly, that's not an entitlement that is there for everyone. And you may actually be a leader or a board member. One thing you'll always be is a family member. We then really tried to pay attention to the senior team that was arrayed around Mike. But actually, for my purposes, when I'm working with a company the size of Coverica, it's that next level of leadership. Maybe not the senior leaders, but culture is often expressed, held, and pushed out through that next level of leadership. So we tried to invest time with maybe the director manager level, because if we don't pay attention to that, it becomes very derivative and very, again, reinforce the Mike-centric approach. And therefore, Mike dare not go away or die because he's holding the precepts, the values, and so forth. So to the extent that we can bake that into that next level of leadership and have them think about how are they displaying that through their oversight and supervision, and teaching supervision that is really values-based and empowering versus heavy-handed and just do the next thing in front of you was really important to us. And one of the things that was fun to do with Mike and Heidi and the family was, we call it priority-based action planning. And that is let's tease out through some exercises the 4 or 5 key areas that we want to address over the next year. Certainly family was a key component of that, and what roles each of the family members might take. How do we develop that next level of leadership within Coverica? What ownership opportunities would there be, not just for family members, but for the broader organization, which is so wonderful to see Mike implementing that now. And then the other layer was philanthropy. Where will the giving happen within the organization?
I love that you brought up the next level of kind of management and leadership, because it helped me a lot when I started working with Leaf, and he was saying the same things that Mike was saying. I was like, okay, cool. Mm-hmm. We're all in the same boat here. I feel very confident about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Well, and that's because if you have those precepts, mm-hmm. I mean, it really is a litmus test of every decision we're doing. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't live up to those precepts, it's call it out. Man, we're not hitting the mark here. We got to get everybody on the same page. And I know sometimes it's frustrating because it's 4:00 in the afternoon and it's hey, we got to get a meeting quick. We got a decision to make on this. And if I can't, then I'm just going to use the 4 precepts and make the decision myself. And we'll just live with consequences. I mean, at a certain point, you got to jump.
Yep.
So
And so, Mike, you just heard Paul talk about some of the wins, right, and the work that your family did with Paul and his team there at the Center Consulting Group, and also obviously some of the changes that have taken place as a result of Paul's work. From your perspective, how do you think the staff, right, the leadership team, the management team or team leads, as we say, Coverica, and the staff as a whole, how do you think they've embraced the change that really Paul and his team were catalytic in creating?
When I think about simple questions and trying to give an answer with a bow on it is problematic in that. This is something that Heidi's aunt, which is now my aunt by marriage, because I'm pretty direct, and especially when it's something of substance that I'm passionate about. And so Struss said one time, she says, Mike, you could be a little bit easier, just kind of telling me what's wrong with me. And I says, I'll tell you what, Struss, if you can tell me why, answer me this, Batman, with this riddle. Why is it some people love me this way and other people can't stand me when I'm the same person? So there were people that embraced it and there were people that left the company. The problem is, and Leif just said it, is that if you're following the 4 precepts and I call it the Coverica ethos, you don't look at that. I mean, it's interesting to think about it and talk about it, but it really doesn't matter if people embrace it. Well, certainly at our size, I mean, you're going to have both. What I'm looking for. And it's been hard. I mean, last night I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, just battling with all of the thoughts of the challenge of future leadership. The 45 years that it took me to get to this point, like Paul was saying, is that a lot of that is irrelevant because those situations are not present. Both my parents were born in 1921. They were young people during the Depression. So there's that new movie, The Boys in the Boat, the Skull story. And I mean, my parents lived that. So I know it firsthand, hearing it from the people that lived it. So their reality is so different than the reality we have today. So if I go back 45 years when I started in the insurance industry and then 32 years of ownership of a business, a lot of those things were very core developing, but they're all different now. So when I'm talking to people, whether it's Charlie, all the way up to people that are older than me, do they understand what I'm trying to convey? That every person has value and every person can make or break the company, the old sayings that you hear, which are true. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation and you can blow it by doing something really stupid. So by and large, having said that, there's a term that I learned some time ago from George Flint, who's now a judge. It's called the tincture of time, which I may have mentioned it before, but it's so imperative because you've got to give people time to adjust. So when we started this whole conversation about the stock purchase of the producers and the staff and the employees, at first it was like fears and what's it going to look like? And so now, most recently, of the, 13 people are on the committee. Mm-hmm. We have 2 that haven't committed, but the other 11 have. So obviously, the majority embraces it. If we base it on that, as opposed to when I first announced what we were doing, 1/1 of 23 was when we changed the corporation from an S corp to a C corp, and we had to do that to be able to have everybody own stock. So it is having that deep abiding faith that it will work out because it's the right thing for the right reasons. And just giving it the time, which everybody knows I'm not at all patient. So this is why I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, because why isn't it happening? Where are we at?
Yeah.
Anyway, and so then there's the added complexity of the things that used to work no longer work, or there's other wrinkles in it. So overall, the older the people are, the more they value what we're doing. The younger the people are, the more indifference and confusion. I mean, us, 95 was the internet world, right? Well, most of the people that I'm closest to, it didn't exist. And now it's so integral to the young people that they are being so misled that they don't, so that they'll get on the internet, they get immediate answers, but how do they even know that those are the right answers? The critical thinking is a real challenge. So what I do see is that they're looking for the more senior, the older people, and they're having great influence. I mean, when you have somebody else that I've talked out of retirement to come join us, or that they're getting older and they're saying, this is a hell of an opportunity, that resonates with them. Whereas when I say it, you're just like everybody else, you're not to get back into politics, but who believes anything that comes out of the mouth of anybody in the politics? The answer, nobody. So you have to give things enough time for them to say, this is really happening. And by the way, from the very beginning with Center Consulting, and I was going to mention this earlier, years ago when Heidi and I first got married and we bought our first house, and I joke a lot because I loved it. I love that, interior decoration, all that stuff, remodeling. I absolutely love that because you get to see the results of what you're working with as opposed to what I do for a living. So I love doing that. And I took Heidi out shopping, and we had this large, you remember the house on Windmeyer, right?
Yeah.
Had this large room that we're trying to, and my beautiful wife finds this little small table, and she thinks, oh, isn't that pretty? I would really love to have it. I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going to have a lot of debates and arguments because this will not work. It's too small. It doesn't fit perspective-wise. So that's when I got my first idea. I better bring in a third party so I don't have to fight with my wife. And as a matter of fact, one of those decorators are coming to our house this afternoon. So it's the same thing. I learned from that lesson to keep my wife happy, and so then and we would, the decorator, I'd say, look, this is what I want, and this is what it should look like. So you need to convince her, because if it comes from me, no, we're not going to do it. So now, fast forward, Center Consulting. I wanted to have a faith-based to where, God is not totally void and it's not all EBITDA, to help with the succession planning, because the producers and the staff will listen to a third party more than they'll listen to me. And so we, one of the big things and you were involved in it, getting a third party to come appraise the value of the company, which, and Garrett, because you had to listen to me, I'm saying this is a tremendous waste of time and money, but we got to do it. So we got our 104-page analysis and all the different ways to value the company, strategic buyers, EBITDA, blah, 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 all this other stuff. Not one person read it, really, but they wanted to make sure that we did it.
Went through the exercise.
We went through the exercise.
Sure.
And so,
how far was the valuation off?
I was going to say, at the end of the day, the valuation was like what we prepared internally and what came out externally.
Well, yeah, no, that's a good question. I will tell you now. Now, see that now you're asking the guy that built the model. So here's the deal: when interest rates are at 2% or 7 to 10%, what does that do to the value of a company?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 18 months ago, it was worth more than it is today because interest rates are so much higher. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then you have less, then you start looking at the marketplace, and as the costs go up, you have fewer buyers. If you go to Highland Park homes versus houses that are being built out, past Prosper, where are you going to have more houses for sale that are cheap? Right? To answer your question more directly, it is leaner than what it should be, but it doesn't matter because it's not for sale externally. whatever the number is, it's the number.
Mike, I do want to say, if you were submitting this a paper, right, back to my finance days in school, you would have gotten an A. I mean, it was over 90% in terms of the level of accuracy, what we came up internally versus what we got externally. So, I mean, to your point, Mike, if interest rates were a little different, if you were trying to really juice up EBITDA, right, the number would have been smack.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I happen to know, having been in the business for 40 some odd years, that we are so well diversified that increases the value. The fact that we do have personal lines, the fact that we do have commercial lines, the fact that we have all the different products. And so I'll get a little granular for just a second. When you're looking at acquisition of other agencies, you have the platform agency, you have an agency, and then you have a book of business. And the platform is what we are, which is we would bring so much in a value beyond the book value. And what the producers don't really understand is they represent a book value.
Right.
Because they're not bringing all of what comes with
just the top line, right?
But getting them comfortable with it, that I'm really not trying to screw anybody with this. And that's the other thing is when somebody like the owner is saying we want to internally perpetuate the company and we want everybody to benefit from this, including the service staff, everybody benefit from it. Mm-hmm. They're looking for the angle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And thank you, government. Thank you, big business. Thank you, EBITDA people. Because it really takes us so far away from what the purpose of a business is, And so, and you've heard me say this before. Wouldn't you rather work with people that you really care about, that know who you are? That when you lose a family member or you have a problem, you've got people that you're a part of. Well, I'm not saying that it's all kumbaya and everybody gets along here, because that would be a lie. But the point is that it's an opportunity that does exist.
Yeah.
That is destroyed with remote work. You don't have that. So I have heard this a million times, and Garrett and Charlie, you can say the same thing. When you first come into this company, you can feel the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So how do you accomplish that if you're all about the numbers and EBITDA?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, I to be personal, for a second, like, as everybody here on the call knows, I had a death in my family recently. And the first couple of calls I got from the company were Mike, Heidi, Rhonda Cox, our CEO, and Leaf. Like, I mean, and actually, I also want to give a shout out to Shelby Bearden, but yeah, I mean, how cool is that the founder, the family of the founder of the company and the CEO, are taking time out of their hectic day to call an employee. And I mean, I've seen this. I mean, Leaf, we've seen this, Charlie, you may know stories. Like, I've seen this with other employees who have lost loved ones. Like, the executive team is going out of their way to comfort them and help them. And I mean, I haven't seen this in some of my other stops. I mean, way back in the day in Fortune 500 companies, like, you were just a number. You were just a cattle in the chute, and this place really is special. And it really goes back. I mean, Mike, it goes back to what you've been trying to do all along, right? This creative business that exemplifies, God's purpose for business.
Yeah.
And
Mike and I've talked about it. It won't always be the case that you're going to get, unanimity around the, hey, thank you for this great opportunity. So the fact that you got 11 out of 13, by the way, you're overachieving, because I've said to Mike a few times, you're lucky if you get a third who see it and are grateful and excited. This is an opportunity. And what an opportunity it is. A third who are kind of go along, get along. I'll keep my powder dry and watch. And then there's a third that are actually rowing the boat against you, because they're so jaded. And so there's some angle Mike has on this, because they live in a zero-sum game. And if this benefits someone else, then I'm losing. And so I think the way you've shepherded this and how inclusive you've made it, and done the hard work of going back and forming that committee and all those are things are laborious and clumsy, but you've also got a more significant buy-in, which is great.
Absolutely. And it's what's so interesting with it is some of you're right. There are some of the younger folks that they're almost reading the room a little bit. I was in a different meeting whenever they were explaining this to a lot of the staff. So I was in the room with a lot of service folks. And granted, I was on Zoom, but I could just kind of feel in the air of like, I'm not real sure about this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you are the ones that are going to benefit the most out of this.
Yeah.
Like, you are going to be the ones that are going to be here for 30 years. And this thing's going to compound. And there were some great questions asked. There was also some questions where I was like, oh my gosh, we have so much work to do in this country to get people financially literate. But that's okay.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here to help. So, a question for both of you guys. If you had to rerun this plan again, if you had to start the recipe over from scratch, what would you have done differently? What things did you learn around the way that, maybe something that surprised you, or maybe there was a landmine that you walked into that's like, gosh, I should have seen that coming, or what things surprised you also?
Yeah, Paul, you answer. I'm kind of curious what you would say.
We uncovered some interesting HR challenges pretty early. I think the second day we were with Mike and Heidi, we took them to lunch and say, hey, we think you've got a problem here. And so, again, Mike said it early on. He believes in people. He wants to believe in people. And, if you're going to live in a risk-averse world, then you're never going to trust anybody, and you're never going to entrust to them. And so I would applaud Mike for wanting to entrust people, but they sometimes take that trust and betray it. So those were some hard things early on. I've been reflecting on this a little bit over the last 24 hours. A couple of things I think I would have paid more attention to, and that is when you have someone like Mike and a leadership team that has sort of been arrayed around them, how do we push further with that leadership team, maybe make some harder decisions and confrontations sooner? Because a lot of this gets down to making some really hard decisions, doesn't it? Leadership, Mike said it earlier, is I'm not afraid to make decisions. And as I coach leaders, there's just that sense of they're always looking to the side. Is this the right decision? Well, if you're tortured by that, you're not going to make a decision. When I say to leaders, you're going to make a decision that's going to go one of three ways. You're going to make a good decision based on good facts, and it's going to turn out right. Don't get cocky because the next decision's coming. But you're going to make a good decision based on good facts, and it's not going to work out. Guess what? You still own it, and you still need to live with the consequences. And the third is you're going to make a boneheaded decision based on bad information, and guess what? You really own that. But do you own it? And so that notion of extreme ownership is hard. And so being able to work with a leadership team and help them prepare for that and understand that not everybody can do that, and maybe call that out more quickly and say, if Mike is going to do the level of succession that he's talking about, we have to have some of those harder conversations sooner. That's one of the things I've been reflecting on.
I think, I mentioned in an earlier podcast about Ben Franklin's book by Walter Isaacson. And at the very back of the book, in the conclusion of the book, he's talking about how Franklin has been judged by different people from different agendas and different perspectives. And, it's fascinating that you'd have to take all of them to really come up with who was this man? Now, I say that as an entry to the point. Now that I have been through this, past the peach seed, now that I've been through it, it's easy to look back and say, well, I should have seen this, should have done that. But that's all fantasy. You don't know till you're there. You don't know until you're in the thick of it what the problems are. Have there been heartbreaks? Yes. Disappointments? Absolutely. But one of the things that it did for me is to increase my compassion for people. I remember when I was talking to Paul and we made the decision that we needed to change, that both John and I needed to get out of our positions and put Rhonda in the position of CEO president. It was very difficult for John and it was very difficult for Andy, and both of them were losing sleep and they were very stressed. And with John, it caught me off guard. And not so much Andy, but finally Andy came to me too with what was troubling him. Well, I understood it, and I didn't look at it from a standpoint, well, of course this is in everybody's best interest. Don't you get it? I mean, die to self, everybody's best interest, right thing, right. I mean, but I'm not going through it like they are. So it increased my compassion and understanding, at the same time saying this has got to happen. So what I would do differently would be based on the fact that I know a lot more today than I did before I went through it. So it's really kind of an unfair question. It's when I was talking to one of our employees about how hard it is to follow the 4 precepts to its conclusion and really execute a decision on, like what you did, Leif. You mentioned that you couldn't get anybody and you finally called up Tony and so you made the decision, you went forward. The first time you do that is very, very difficult, but it gets easier. Mm-hmm. So I would say that now that I have been through this is why I said to you, Garrett and Leif, I'm not going through another succession planning. From the very beginning, what would Ansel end up looking like? Let's start there.
You told a story about, and I've got kids that are teenagers now, which is
scary.
A whole nother podcast in itself. Yeah. Tell the story about, because I've mentioned something about my son dating, and you had told me a story about somebody that said, before you get permission, you guys need to, where I'm
how it's going to end.
Yeah.
How it's going to end. Yeah, this was a sermon at Stonebriar where this pastor's, I don't know, I guess she was 14 or 16 years old, wanted to go on a date. And the father very wisely said, I will not let you go on a date until you can tell me how it's going to end. Because you're not going to marry this young man. And the relationship is going to have an end. So tell me how it's going to end. And she looked at him like, oh, come on, Dad, I'm 16 years old. I hear that from Samantha. Dad, I'm 26. Dad, I'm 26. So, which side of the fence you on? But anyway, so 16-year-old. And so she came back to him with almost like a PowerPoint presentation of how it was going to work out. And so he felt completely comfortable with turning her loose on being able to go out on a date. Now, whether you think that women or daughters should date at 16 or not is really not the point. The point is that he gave her provocative thoughts about what she's doing, as opposed to just, oh, he's cute and he thinks I'm pretty. You're really thinking through the magnitude of what it is. Now, one thing I told Samantha when she was dating some guys, as I said, let me ask you something. If this is a guy you think you're going to marry, because she's thought that 3 times so far, if this is a guy you think that you're going to marry, I got a question for you to answer. And that is, if you have a special needs child, is he going to work enough jobs so that you can stay home and care for that child? Mm-hmm. You want to take the air out of a balloon, that'll do it.
No.
So I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go with it, but the point is putting into your children's minds that what they're thinking about doing does have long-term effect and responsibility. So the transition of this company for, the producers, the way they're looking at it and the staff looking at it, they really don't understand the opportunity that's in front of them. I understand it. They don't understand it. And I've joked about this saying somebody here that I have people that have been with us almost 30 years or more. Gary's, it's been more than that. We go back 43 years. But the point is they're going to wake up someday, years from now, after I'm dead and gone, and they'll have all this money that is because of what we're doing today. And they're going to say, that bald guy really wasn't so stupid after all. And you know what? I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to go there is because when we were talking about Ansel, the discussion was as we're forming this is how this is how you get out of it.
Yep.
And I remember having a discussion with Garrett as I was kind of pacing around my pool on the phone, as I usually do, as my wife would tell you. It's just kind of like, hey, I need to know if something were to happen to me that what happens next, because I need to make sure that my family's taken care of. And not, how much money are we going to make the first year? What's the salary is going to be or whatever it was, how does this conclude? And what happens if something happens to one of us? Let's make sure that we're taken care of.
And going back to something Mike just said, when you go into business, and especially if you're fortunate enough that you're able to choose your partners, right? Like Paul, you mentioned earlier, going into business with your partner. I mean, Mike, that same question that you just posed a second ago about your spouse, choosing your spouse, I would say you got to ask yourself a very similar question about choosing your business partners. Like, can I trust this person? Can I assume that this person, if something ever happens to me, that they would make sure that my family and so forth are taken care of, and there's no hostile takeover or anything like that? Can I really trust this person? And if the answer is, I'm not so sure, you better not get in business with them, because you're about to make a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Well, you know what that does, Garrett? That is the justification for the EBITDA freaks. Mm-hmm. Make as much as you can, as quick as you can, and get out.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be dependent on other people to do the right things. You want to be totally centric on yourself. And oh boy, that makes everything work so well together.
Everything's about the exit, right?
Yeah.
Which is different than what, Mike, you've said, and Leif, you hit on a little bit. You're thinking as a steward, not just for the company, but for yourself and for your family. And maybe just jump back a little bit. What I've seen in Mike is his stewardship is, let's make sure I'm not just securing the Sterlacy family financial security and so forth. Yes, that's important. But what about the Coverica security and its ability to go forward and have the resources? And again, you've sacrificed some EBITDA definitely to do that. But again, Leif, at a much younger age, I see you thinking in that same way. That's called living in the light of mortality or eternity, whichever phrase you like.
Well, and I'm going to say this. I would debate the question. I mean, financially, I've done beyond what I ever could have imagined, because I do think like that. Mm-hmm. If you have people let's for the people that are looking at this, that are non-believers, or they're just trying to figure out, how do I do the best I can to make as much as I can for my family? That I want to do this for my family. Here's the thought. Is an employee that is healthy, well-adjusted, has friends, and has a company that's trying to get them to either be content or do what they need to do to make more money or get a different position, and having the KPIs that come with that, or help them build a resume to go somewhere else, how can that not be in the best interest of everybody involved? And here's the key. When you have people working like that, the whole company prospers. And it's sustainable. So I would argue that this is the way a business should operate, because we will do better over the long haul. You've got other people that will step in and care, because that was the whole genesis of the stock, is I'm telling everybody now what you're doing is going to matter, because as the stock increases, so does your retirement funds or money that you have in the bank. So, if you get people fighting in the same direction, that's the movie Boys in the Boat. That's what it is. If everybody pushes the oars at the same rate, they become one, they're going to win. And they did. They won the gold medal against the Germans in Berlin.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And I think, I don't know, Mike, if you're going to recommend Boys in the Boat, but maybe that's a good segue for our recommendations that we like to do at the end of the show. So, as I'm sure our faithful listeners know, we usually like to recommend professional development resources, sometimes entertainment things, but things that we've recently consumed, feel like we've benefited from, in hopes that they'll help you. So, Leif, why don't you get started with your recommendation?
So I get really drawn to wild, outlandish book titles. It's something that gets me to pick something up off the shelf, or to, as you're scrolling down your Kindle, it's like, hey, I'm going to click on that. So Ryan Halliday has a book called Trust Me, I'm Lying, which is really about kind of guerrilla marketing, doing things in a lean startup that can get attention that is kind of non-traditional marketing. And just things that he did at companies that he was at, kind of creating those viral moments that a company can go through, or doing something kind of non-traditional. I like those thinkers that can think outside the box. And so the other thing that I would recommend, just more on a personal level, I go to a fairly large church that's near me. Growing up in a very small church, or not a small church, but a Church of Christ church. I mean, it was all a cappella. If you heard music, that was a sin. It's a very different church.
Hardcore, yeah.
Yeah, it's, and me being as inquisitive as I am, I'd always get in trouble. It's like wanting to debate things in the Bible. So anyway, I'm at a church now called Lake Point Church. They are out of Rockwall, Texas. They've got a YouTube channel. He's got a series on there called Controversial Jesus, which is kind of, using the Bible as lattice to interpret modern themes. So there's a kind of a section there about, things going on in society. There's political divides, and how kind of what the teachings of the Bible, how you should interpret that. There's also one that it's actually kind of going a little viral right now from a couple of weeks ago, to where it was the entire kind of Israel Hamas thing from the perspective of the Bible and the 4,000-year-old history of that conflict. So it's very, very good. So I actually listened to it again last night.
Oh, cool.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, Leif, the book you mentioned about the marketing are some of the tactics that you intend to deploy at Ansel. So I look forward to hearing
absolutely
some of those ideas. So I want to. We talked a few episodes ago about LinkedIn, and I really encourage listeners, if you're not on LinkedIn, if you're not really sort of tuned into it, it really is a terrific resource. I'm, for the record, not really on any other social platforms, just because that's just not kind of my jam. But I really think people are posting some really, really great educational content on LinkedIn. And there's one author in particular I want to call attention to. So as a software product person, I love reading, other product people's writings. And so there's a gentleman in Poland. His name is Paul Keisling. Probably mispronounced that, but Pawel, last name Huryn. We'll link to it in the show notes. But he is doing some awesome stuff around educating people on, really sort of understanding what the problems are that users are dealing with, right? In terms of trying to build software solutions for them, and really some interesting sort of empathetic ways of approaching, consumers, users, to, again, try to sort of unlock that value, right? And whenever that solution that we're trying to build. So, it really, especially if you're trying to build products or trying to solve problems in general, check out his writings. He's doing some really cool stuff.
Very good.
I'll check that out. I've been listening to an audiobook. I never listened to audiobooks. This is my first one I've ever tried. It's on Spotify Premium if you have it. So there's an American producer. His name's Rick Rubin. Leif actually told me about him. Then Garrett knows. Yeah.
Very eccentric guy.
Yeah. So he wrote a book, came out last year in January. It's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And it's about creativity and how to be as what many of us would call artists, but he makes this argument that we're all creating something. So
true,
and it's just through a different media and from different source material. So it's just a really cool book. I'd recommend even just the first chapter. Give it a listen. It's 5 minutes. So yeah,
cool. And Paul, what's something you've been tuned into recently?
A couple of things. I'll do an advertisement for the Center Consulting Group. We do a number of these very short 3 to 5 minute videos. There's one called My Family Comes to Work With Me that really invites family members in a family business to sort of look at who they are within that constellation of being in a family business, and how who I am in the family impacts who I am in the workplace. Some things like that. And I've enjoyed a little book called Succession by Greer and Fagerstrom. It's targeted towards nonprofits, but the reason I like it is because it's how do I do mission critical transitions? How do I do values based transitions? And it calls out the posture of a leader as well as the practices. But I think this particular podcast we've done today is all about the posture Mike brought into the succession planning process. So I really like that little book.
Very cool.
Well, I'll be the old man boring. And Paul, I think we're only a couple months apart. So So as an old man, I have been studying Proverbs 25, 1 through 31, which is written, it's wisdom for leaders. And two passages. One was 26:20. Fire goes out without wood, and quarrels disappear when gossip stops. That's one of those ones you got to meditate on. And the other one is 27, and I'll read it. 27:21. Fire tests the purity of silver and gold, but a person is tested by being praised. That's for people that are kind of really into themselves. That's a pretty important proverb. The other thing I would recommend is now I'm getting real boring here is Terry Jordan's supplemental text to the U.S. Constitution. So I'm rereading the Constitution, and here's a fun fact that I learned. There have been 11,000 proposed amendments to the Constitution, but only 27 have made it.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive.
It's a durable document.
It's a very durable, it's a brilliant document. So
It really is.
That's all I got.
Yeah.
Well, guys, Paul, this has been a blast having you on. I don't think this is going to be your last appearance. This seems very natural for all of us to have you here. So
yeah, I'm like a bad cold. I don't go away.
Well, we appreciate everything that you've done and changing this friend of mine for 20 years. You've brought a lot of insight. So.
Yep.
Yeah, see you in Florida, Paul.
Yeah, one of the great byproducts of consulting to the depth that I've been able to do with Mike and Heidi is I've gotten some wonderful new friends out of this, and I continue to learn from Mike, and I'm really grateful for that.
Love it. Well, guys, thanks for listening to today's episode of What It Takes to Lead. New episodes drop every other Thursday. Please give us a line if you have a question or a suggestion. You can reach us at podcast@coverica.com or via X, formerly known as Twitter, at WITTL pod, POD. Finally, if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks so much.